All right. Once again, this is Paul Glumaz, your senior Seattle LaRouche guy. And we have now a situation emerging on a global scale of the breakdown of the financial system on a much bigger scale than occurred in 2008. And what you have is a process of acceleration, of the rate of acceleration of the disintegration of the financial structures centered in the Wall Street, London situation. This criminal system is, at this moment, going into a profound crisis. And at any moment now, if something is not done to intervene, to wipe out the worthless financial assets of the system and to protect the part of the banking system which is the functional part, where there are real assets and real transactions and real goods and services being provided, you're looking at a mass kill. You're looking at a mass disintegration of society in the very near future. Now the problem is that we have we don't have Franklin Delano Roosevelt in the White House who could deal with this. We have a psychotic, malignant narcissist who is currently president, who is a total creature of the British crowd, who are actually committed to a mass kill policy. And they intend to use the systemic collapse of the transatlantic financial system, that's the City of London and Wall Street, to effect a mass kill of the world population. Now, for them, however, the emergence of Russia and China and India and the BRICS nations around a non-speculative financial system is a strategic threat. Because if they allow or unleash the collapse as it was intended, then they have no guarantee that those nations, along with forces in the United States, would not move to use the powers of the federal executive and other nations similarly, use the power of their federal executive to reorganize and wipe out the worthless financial instruments and maintain the functions of the banking system that is needed for the functions of society, for the functions of the economy. That can be done, and the first step towards doing that is, of course, Glass-Steagall, the implementation of Glass-Steagall. So the movement, the LaRouche movement, has spent the last 7 years, the last 8 years actually, organizing for the passage, return to Glass-Steagall, organizing in preparation for this crisis, which is now unfolding as we speak. Now, Obama as president guarantees that no positive action will be taken to deal with the systemic breakdown of the financial crisis. In fact, he will block any positive action to be taken to deal with the financial crisis, because any positive action that will be done to deal with the financial crisis ends the power behind Obama. It ends Wall Street, it ends the City of London, it ends the power of the European oligarchs, it ends the power of the British monarchy. So this is the situation. And at this moment of crisis, the dog and pony shows, the little games, all the games have to go. And the best people in both parties have to come together around implementing this policy, starting with Glass-Steagall. If they do not do so, if they do not move now to do so, then there will be a total disintegration of society under Obama, under the financial crisis. It is precisely in this sense that the discussion is now going on, although it's not in the public, it's partly in the public, but it's not really in the public, of what do you do with Obama, who is not competent, who is not mentally capable of dealing with the crisis. And what you do with Obama is in the 25th Amendment of the United States. What you do with Obama is the cabinet has to remove Obama. The vice president, the secretary of state, the other cabinet members have to send a letter to the Speaker of the House saying that we have removed Obama for incompetence. He is not capable of functioning. He's not capable of carrying out the duties for which he was elected. And at that moment, the vice president, current vice president, becomes acting president of the United States. That's the 25th Amendment. That's the Constitution of the United States as it was modified in the 60s, following the Kennedy assassination. And that moment has to come pretty soon. That's how serious the situation is. And that moment could very well come very soon. And the vast majority of the U.S. population has no idea, one, that they're about to reach a situation where all their pension funds, all their bank accounts, everything is frozen. They're about to reach a situation they would not have ever dreamed. And also, we have reached a situation where the application of the 25th Amendment to remove Obama, which is absolutely necessary, has to be done at this point. So we're going into the early part of January, and we have a crisis of incredible magnitude. Now let's go into the crisis a little bit in terms of the financial system. Okay. What you have is, first of all, a financial mountain of speculation. Much of the speculation is in the form of derivatives. These derivatives are then attached to various speculative bubbles. The revival of the housing bubble, the oil bubble, the tar sands bubble, the shale oil bubble. So you have a number of different bubbles. Then you have the junk bond bubble. Now, junk bonds are debt instruments which have high risk. And because they have high risk, they have high yield. Now, the trick is that the junk bonds may have as high as 14% interest. They may have as high as 20% interest. They may have, and that's where the real profit is made. The profit is made on risky bonds. But of course, if the whole thing goes, the bailout is there. So we're at a point now where the junk bond system of junk bonds, which is where the real action is now in deep trouble. We're at a point now where the drop of oil price is causing a collapse of all of the debt involved in the Saskatchewan, Alberta, North Dakota boondoggle of we're going to make it on an oil boom. Now, the whole idea behind the oil boom, because the price of oil was high, was that this is how we're going to save the economy. We're going to mass produce oil, and then we're going to be able to have energy independence, right? But who's going to consume all this oil if there's no expansion of the physical economy? Where's all this oil going to be consumed? So the very act of trying to have an oil boom in a global economic situation in which the United States, North America, and Europe's economies are not growing, but they're actually shrinking because there's no investment except in financial, real estate, and other bubbles, then who's going to consume all this oil? Gee whiz. So you have a massive increase of oil. You have a massive increase of oil, and then the Russians, they've been depending on oil, so they have essentially been making their extra on oil, and they realize that with the sanctions that they can't do that anymore. So they're shifting their entire economy to developing internal industries. So they're okay relatively because they don't have a Federal Reserve. They don't have a London Wall Street system. So they're essentially reorganizing their economy to create diversity and infrastructure and development. And they're being supported by China. China's doing the same thing. They're not under the control of Wall Street or the City of London. And they're not tied up in all these boondoggles and financial speculation and what have you. So now you have essentially the drop of oil prices is one trigger. There's many other triggers. This thing is overripe. So are they going to bail it out? Can they bail it out? Is it possible to bail out this whole system? Well, how are you going to do that? You already did a huge bailout. You've been bailing out every month. The Federal Reserve has been buying up toxic assets, quantitative easing every month. They finally raised the interest rates a little bit to try to dry out some of this speculative activity. But it's not going to. But still, how are they going to deal with this? They're going to do another super bailout? Well, what most citizens do not know, what most Americans do not know, is that the Dodd-Frank bill, which was passed back in, I think it's 2010, has provisions where systemically significant banking institutions, when faced with bankruptcy, such that such bankruptcy will collapse the whole system, there is a legal process within the Dodd-Frank bill where an orderly liquidation authority under the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation can carry out a process whereby people's deposits can be confiscated. It's called the bail-in. This is what is happening in Italy right now. This is what is happened in Cyprus. So you have, without even reading the bill, most congressmen voted for a bill that essentially redefines deposits into a bank as assets of the bank, as investment in the bank. Your deposits are not an investment. That's the whole difference between as a investment house and a commercial bank. A commercial bank is not, the deposits do not belong to the commercial bank. They are not investments in the bank. They are not investments. They are deposits that the bank lends money to very specific things under regulations, and formerly regulations, under Glass-Steagall regulations. They are not to be used for speculation. You're not supposed to risk the deposits in the gambling casino. This was all changed under Alan Greenspan and beyond. So now everybody's deposits are now in the risk gambling system. And what's going to prevent the whole collapse of your deposit base in a financial collapse? Nothing. Except that they made it legal now, under Dodd-Frank, to confiscate your deposits as part of keeping the bank open, keeping the bank function. As soon as that happened, it's all over. As soon as people's, like what's going on in Italy right now, with the 4 banks that went under, as soon as that starts happening here, it's all over. You're going to have a return to a regulated banking system. You're going to have to wipe out all the worthless paper. And you have to do that through the implementation of Glass-Steagall. And you're going to have the executive branch of the U.S. government function to carry this through. And who do you have in the White House? You have Obama, a killer, who has been put in there essentially to be there at this moment when this system comes down to either launch a war that would lead to nuclear war with Russia, or preside over the financial collapse and a mass kill of the world population affected in the collapse of the transactional financial structure with nothing being put in place. This is the policy coming from the British monarchy and the people behind the Saudi, behind the terrorism which has been running rampant right now. This is their policy, a mass kill policy, to bring the world into a population density of about 1 billion to 2 billion people. That's their mass kill policy. Their mass kill policy is using climate, the climate hoax, to prevent development and prevent the try to force the reduction of emissions, which won't happen, by the way. Countries will not cut back their emissions. What happened what happened in Paris was not an agreement, a binding agreement. It was never really meant to be a binding agreement. But it sets up the atmospherics now for lawsuits in countries like Canada, Great Britain, Australia, and under Obama in the United States, to launch lawsuits against companies, corporations, to confiscate their assets, their bank accounts, and confiscate the pension holders under the guise of indemnity in the lawsuits against their so-called polluting. And this is another scam. This is another scam being run on a global scale. But the ultimate consequence of this is a mass kill of humanity. And that mass kill of humanity, whether it's in that form or in a nuclear war that's launched because Russia, China, and other nations are resisting the mass kill, that is what you're up against. That's how serious it is. And the population is sleepwalking right now into Armageddon, not from a biblical standpoint or a religious standpoint, but into an actually planned mass kill. And Obama is there to preside over that process of a mass kill of humanity, and inclusively the U.S. population. So this brings us back to the situation that we're in right now. The situation that we're in right now is that we must have the 25th Amendment applied very soon to remove this mass kill oriented individual who is currently standing in the way of the very existence and very survival of the United States. What you have now is a situation in which the Russians have threatened Turkey. The Turks downed the airplane, the Russian Su-24 bomber. It is well known that this was done with the United States foreknowledge, with the backing of Obama. And then the Turks moved their troops into northern Iraq. What is going on here, or what has been going on, with Obama presenting one perspective and other forces in the United States presenting another perspective, is Russia is moving to save and defend the Syrian government, the Syrian army, which is the linchpin of any defeat of ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and what have you. ISIS, Al-Qaeda, etc., and these religious and these wars are causing massive refugees and totally disrupting Europe. And they're creating the basis for fascism in Europe in response to the refugees, as nations try to deal with the crisis of a wave of refugees who are essentially presented as a threat to the population. And out of that comes the kind of fascism that you're seeing with Donald Trump, building the wall and all of that. The same kind of thing is being faced by the collapse in the Caribbean and in Mexico and Central America and so forth. Now, the drug lords especially in places like El Salvador and Mexico. Now, so this is one aspect of it. So Russia has moved to stop all of this and has had a very effective aerial support for the Syrian army, and they're starting to break down ISIS. Now, in this situation, Obama was saying, he still is saying, that Assad must go before any collaboration between the U.S. and Russia in stopping ISIS. Kerry just said no in Moscow, that there needs to be, there doesn't have to be such an understanding before the U.S. to collaborate with Russia. So which one is it? Obama has one policy, Kerry saying another policy. Is there a split in the United States? Well, you better believe there's a split. And this is the split whether it's in the question of whether the United States is going to escalate a proxy war against Russia under the guise of fighting terrorism, or whether the United States is going to cooperate with Russia in the fight towards. Now, there's another aspect to this, and this is something that Putin just did today in Moscow. The core of ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria and in Iraq is the drug trade. This is the army protecting the drug trade coming out of Afghanistan, the heroin trade. This is the banks. The funds from the drug trade internationally are the core of this international banking system. It's the core part of the funds required to maintain the leverage required to maintain the expansion of speculation on which the whole system depends. You start to interfere with the drug traffic, you're essentially threatening, you're collapsing the whole transatlantic banking system of London and Wall Street. So that's the kind of situation you're dealing with in this situation. So right now the Russians are publicly saying that it's the drug trade which is at the center of ISIS. But it's also the center of the international banking system. So this thing is coming to a head. Will Obama be removed under the 25th Amendment? And the U.S. work with Russia to start to clean this mess up? Deal with Saudi Arabia, deal with Turkey, which are supporters of ISIS and what have you, and end this crap? And will the United States, in so doing, also deal internally with the financial collapse? This is the question. How many Americans have any idea that this is the question? That's the issue. So in this situation, where you have Glass-Steagall, you have a new credit being created to put people back to work the way FDR did, and collaborating with Russia to deal with this international strategic problem of terrorism, you have the end of the empire. You have the end of the power that's been running this world to hell, and you have a new system emerging. And it's that new system which gives humanity hope for a future. A lot of people wondered about this Paris Climate Conference, which everybody was there. It was a huge extravaganza. And Obama said it was the biggest extravaganza in all world history. What did they come up with? They came up with nothing. A voluntary carbon reduction plan. What is that? But the hidden part of it is this sets the atmosphere for lawsuits against companies that so-called are involved in building for other nations, or trading in goods that actually pollute, like power plants, coal-fired plants, oil-fired plants. And what happened is that while all this is going on, out of Oxford University, the Bank of England funded a project at Oxford, at an Oxford offshoot of Oxford University, to create the legal fiction known as Climate Earth, which means that you can have, on behalf of Climate Earth in various jurisdictions, you can have companies sued. You can have corporations sued. You can have confiscation under court order of assets. Now, this concept was presented by Prince Charles just before the Paris conference at the Commonwealth meeting in Malta. Now, what he presented was this idea of sustainable responsibility and of a judicial structure, which is now going to be put into effect in Canada, United Kingdom, and Australia. But with Obama on board, it's also going to be set up in the U.S. It's also in part going on in the U.S. around the lawsuit in New York against Exxon. So essentially, based on the pollution, you're going to have these lawsuits, which then are going to interfere with the ability of nations to involve companies for developing their infrastructure, developing their energy capabilities. And these things can then extend to even companies that are not in Wall Street or the City of London. Chinese companies, Russian companies. So you have Indian companies. You have a global system of legal financial warfare, similar to what happened with Argentina. Argentina said they couldn't pay the debt, and they have to write down the debt. They couldn't function. They faced the total destruction of their society. In order to have a nation, they had to write down the debt. What is more sovereign, the nation or the debt? The international bankers said, no, the debt's not sovereign. However, the vast majority of the creditors, over 80% of the creditors, agreed to the terms of the write-down and have been paid on the basis of that agreement. A small part of this debtor group said, no, we're not going into an agreement on this. And then what are called vulture funds bought up the portion of that debt, and then they've been going into court suing to have the ability to seize airlines or seize bank accounts or what have you. And the U.S. courts have given these vulture funds the right to seize the assets of Argentina at the full face value of the debt, when they only paid a few cents on a dollar for that debt. And these vulture funds are the kind of disruptor that has been going around disrupting the whole process, whereby nations are now under financial attack through the court structures in the United States and Europe and so forth and so on, poorer nations. This same principle is now going to be applied to the climate issue. In other words, this is warfare. This is legal financial warfare directed by an empire against humanity to prevent humanity from having economic development. And it's the resistance to this, coming from Russia, coming from China, and coming from India and other nations, which is setting up the conditions for a global war. And either this empire gets crushed, or we're going to have a mass kill of humanity. It gets crushed, and we have the policies that we should have had all along. If Kennedy had lived, if FDR had lived, we would have had these policies all along. So this is where we're at. Thank you. Intervene to wipe out the worthless financial assets of the system and to protect the part of the banking system, which is the functional part, where there are real assets and real transactions and real goods and services being provided. You're looking at a mass kill. You're looking at a mass disintegration of society in the very near future. Now the problem is that we have we don't have Franklin Delano Roosevelt in the White House who could deal with this. We have a psychotic, malignant narcissist who is currently president, who is a total creature of the British crowd, who are actually committed to a mass kill policy. And they intend to use the systemic collapse of the transatlantic financial system, that's the City of London and Wall Street, to effect a mass kill. Little games, all the games have to go. And the best people in both parties have to come together around implementing this policy, starting with Glass-Steagall. If they do not do so, if they do not move now to do so, then there will be a total disintegration of society under Obama, under the financial crisis. It is precisely in this sense that the discussion is now going on although it's not in the public, it's partly in the public, but it's not really in the public, of what do you do with Obama, who is not competent, who is not mentally capable of dealing with the crisis. And what you do with Obama is in the 25th Amendment of the United States. What you do with Obama is the cabinet has to remove Obama, the vice president of the world population. Now, for them, however, the emergence of Russia and China and India and the BRICS nations around a non-speculative financial system is a strategic threat. Because if they allow or unleash the collapse as it was intended, then they have no guarantee that those nations, along with forces in the United States, would not move to use the powers of the federal executive, and other nations similarly, use the power of their federal executive to reorganize and wipe out the worthless financial instruments and maintain the functions of the banking system that is needed for the functions of society, for the functions of the economy. That can be done, and the first step towards doing that is, of course, Glass-Steagall, the implementation of Glass-Steagall.
Go ahead.
All right. Once again, this is Paul Glumaz, your senior Seattle LaRouche guy, and we have now a situation emerging on a global scale of the breakdown of the financial system on a much bigger scale than occurred in 2008. And what you have is a process of acceleration, of the rate of acceleration of the disintegration of the financial structures centered in the Wall Street, London situation. This criminal system is, at this moment, going into a profound crisis. And at any moment now, if something is not done, to Steagall. So the movement, the LaRouche movement, has spent the last 7 years, the last 8 years actually, organizing for the passage, return to Glass-Steagall, organizing in preparation for this crisis, which is now unfolding as we speak. Now, Obama as president guarantees that no positive action will be taken to deal with the systemic breakdown of the financial crisis. In fact, he will block any positive action to be taken to deal with the financial crisis, because any positive action that will be done to deal with the financial crisis ends the power behind Obama. It ends Wall Street, it ends the City of London, it ends the power of the European oligarchs, it ends the power of the British monarchy. So this is the situation. And at this moment of crisis, the dog and pony shows, the